when talking to Jordan Peterson, we had this little interlude, he and I, about Genesis and about my sort of atheist interpretation of the story, which sort of champions the serpent in the garden and condemns the lying, cheating, evil God that fools Adam and Eve. And you very kindly sent me an email because Jordan said in the podcast, I should ask Jonathan Pageau about that because I think he'd have something to say. And let's find out if you do. I think the best thing we can do here is sort of walk through the story. I want to walk through some of the objections that I have with Genesis.
Sure.
Bearing in mind that I've done this before in a response to Ken Ham, the biblical fundamentalist and founder of the Creationist Museum, who believes Genesis is a literal account. So I've made these criticisms to Ken Ham, so people might sort of think this is trodden soil, but bear in mind that raising objections about the serpent in the garden to someone who thinks it's a literal story is a very different thing to raising those objections to somebody who sees it with a touch more allegory and metaphor. So hopefully people will find this interesting. But the main, I guess, to sort of start with a summary of what the problems are, without getting you to respond to these straight away, we'll just sort of lay some of the thoughts out, like plant some flags, as they say. Everybody is familiar with the story of Adam and Eve. They're created in the Garden of Eden, and there is a particular tree in the Garden of Eden called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that God tells them not to eat of. He says you can eat of any tree, but if you eat of that particular tree, then in the day that you eat of it, you will die. Whatever that means. Now, hold on, I can feel one coming.
Gonna sneeze?
Could feel a sneeze. Maybe it was just the spirit leaving me.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be careful because I'm gonna have to say bless you and then
talk smack about God.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah. I'm more than blessed enough, Jonathan. You can save it for those who really need it. So they decide to sort of honor God's command for whatever reason. It's not really obviously established that God is the moral author of the universe. He's just created the universe, but for whatever reason, they just sort of know that God is the person to follow. And then we're introduced to this character called the serpent. And interestingly, the serpent is traditionally identified as Satan or the devil, but the text never does that. We just know that it's a serpent. And the text describes the serpent as more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord has made. Crafty or subtle or shrewd. And the serpent goes to Eve and says, look, did God tell you not to eat of that tree? And Eve says, yeah, he told me not to eat of that tree because in the day I eat of it, I'll die. And the serpent says, well, that's not going to happen. You're not going to die in the day that you eat of the tree. It's just that if you eat of that tree, God knows you'll become like him, knowing good and evil. And he doesn't want that. So Eve looks at the fruit, and interestingly, the text says that she saw that it was good for food and pleasing to the eye, which it's unclear if that's sort of Eve's opinion or whether she actually sees it is in fact good for food and pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom. She took some and ate it. She gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then both of their eyes were opened and they realized they were naked. And so basically we've got this classic disobeying of God's command. And the question is, what happens? Do they die in the day thereof? Well, on a sort of surface level reading, no, they don't. Adam lives to be like 900 years old or something. What does happen? God tells us himself. He says, now the man has become like us, knowing good and evil. And he banishes them from the Garden of Eden, says they must not be allowed to reach out their hand and eat from the tree of life, lest they inherit eternal life, implying that there's another tree, the tree of life, that they could just as easily pick and eat from, which would give them eternal life. But God somehow doesn't want that for them, and so banishes them from the Garden of Eden. Not before, however, punishing them. He punishes the serpent by forcing him to crawl on his belly for the rest of, for generations to come. Interestingly, implying that the kind of serpent that was in the garden before the fall had legs, which is a kind of interesting thing to think about. He punishes Adam, or wings, indeed, something like a dragon. He punishes Adam by forcing him to have to toil for his life. So now man has to work and sort of work the land in order to eat and survive. And he punishes Eve by greatly increasing her pain in childbirth. But interestingly, he also does this for their descendants, which means that according to this Genesis account, the reason why today women experience extreme pain in childbirth is because of the punishment inflicted upon a woman thousands of years ago for committing this crime? I know you've already got a lot to say, but we'll raise some of these objections and see where you want to start. Right. So here are some of the objections. The first thing is to say that it seems like if the serpent is lying and is evil and is the devil, then Eve is somehow deceived here. She's deceived by a half-truth. She's fooled into eating the fruit. And when she does so, not only is she punished for something which she was fooled into doing, but now her descendants are also punished for a crime that they did not commit, but rather one of their ancestors committed, and arguably didn't do so knowingly. Not only that, but because she's eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, this implies that before she ate of the tree, she didn't have a knowledge of good and evil. So if she's being punished for doing something evil and bad, then it seems incongruous that she would be punished for doing something evil and bad before she had a knowledge of what was evil and bad, because she hadn't eaten of the fruit yet. So again, it seems unfair to punish her for doing something that she can't have known was bad. The third question I would raise is why the serpent is there in the first place. If the serpent is this evil creature that's sort of crawling around Eden, why is the serpent in paradise in the first place? Why would God place him there? Why would God allow the serpent to be there? Fourthly, it's unclear what exactly is inaugurated by this event. We're told that original sin enters the world in this event. However, there must have already been something like a proneness to sinning with Adam and Eve, because at the very first opportunity they were given, they fell for it. And it can't be that sin entered the world through sin. That doesn't make any sense. You have to sin to bring it about. So there was already sin and already a propensity to sin. There was already evil because the serpent's in the garden. And it's implied that there was already suffering in the Garden of Eden because God punishes Eve by greatly increasing her pains in childbirth. So it's unclear to me, when they eat of the tree, what exactly it is that enters the world. Maybe mortality. We can talk about that. So there's sort of a moral objection here, that there's this crime that's committed unknowingly, without a knowledge of good and evil, fooled into doing so by the serpent, and then descendants are punished for the crime that they didn't commit. The other sort of side of this objection is to say, this is all assuming that actually, yeah, the serpent is evil and did tempt Eve. But as I said to Jordan Peterson, there are some interpretations of the story that take the side of the serpent, that say that God doesn't want them to know good and evil. He's a jealous God. He's a self-admittedly jealous God. And the serpent is the one who comes along and says, God's lying to you, right? He just doesn't want you to be like him. And when they eat of the tree, they find that they have become like him, and the serpent was completely right. Everything the serpent said came true. They did become like God, knowing good and evil. And then God proactively banishes them. It's not some natural result of their sin that they have to sort of fall away from the Garden of Eden. It's like God proactively saying, you're not allowed in here anymore. And you could just reach out your hand and eat from the tree of life, but I'm not going to let you. I don't want you to. And so he guards the gates of Eden with a cherubim with a flaming sword. So my question to you, Jonathan, is what the hell is going on here?